Thank you so much, Dr. Paldiel, for being here with us and our community today. As you know, I'm going to pose questions to you to guide our time together, but always just let me know if you prefer not to respond to a certain question. And of course, feel free to share anything you want to say that I didn't have the foresight to ask myself.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Dr. Paldiel. So we'll go ahead and get started. Would you mind beginning for us with what your family life was like before the Holocaust? It's my humble understanding that you were born in 1937 in the midst of the Holocaust. And so I wonder also if you may share how you learned about your family's life before the war and any particular memories that you might have.
Well, I was born in Belgium, in Antwerp, the city in Belgium in 1937. There was no Holocaust then in Belgium. Belgium had declared its neutrality when the war broke out in September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. But then, so I was 3 years old when suddenly in May 1940, Germany invaded Belgium. As well as France and the Netherlands. And what we did, my family, I don't remember that. I was 3 years old. That's too young to remember anything, but from what I know from my family's history, like many other Jewish people, and not only Jewish people, thousands of others, we picked whatever belongings we had. We found a mover, and we hired him to take us to the border, to the French border, the border between Belgium and France, in the hope of entering France, because the general thought was that in France we would be safe. The French would be able to hold back the Germans, as they did in World War I, because nobody foresaw the sudden collapse of France. So anyway, we were able to get into France. A lot of people were not able, but we were lucky. It's a whole story there. And in France, we moved from one place to another when we arrived in France, we arrived in southern France in a place called Saint-Gaudin. It's a small town. We were told that the war is over. France had lost. An armistice had been declared. And France, 2/3 of France was occupied by the Germans. 1/3 of France, the Germans allowed the French to have a government from the city called Vichy. And so we moved from Saint-Gaudin, we moved to the Vichy zone, which in Marseille, which is quite a large city, where we stayed for a while. We got a visa to go to Cuba, but it didn't work out at the last moment. And so we didn't board the boat. In the meantime, the Germans came into the Vichy zone in Marseille, November 1942. And so there was a rumor that not far from Marseille, the Italians had established a zone in France. And the Italians were not bothering the Jews. And so we fled to the Italian zone. And that too is the story how we made it. And we settled not far from the city of Grenoble in a little village called Vars. And we were in the Italian zone from early 43 until September 43. Because the Italians were allied to Nazi Germany, and they had also passed some anti-Semitic laws, but they were not harming the Jews physically. We stayed in that village, and then in the summer of 1943, the Italians began to evacuate their troops from their zone into Nice. And we decided we were not going to go to Nice. We decided to head to the Swiss border. That was in September. Somebody told us to look up a certain priest, a Catholic priest in the city of Evian-les-Bains, which was not far from the Swiss border. My mother went to see him, and she told him that she was stuck with her family. We were then, my father, my mother, 6 children, and my grandmother. And the Germans were beginning to take over the Italian zone slowly, and we asked for his help. And he arranged for border smugglers to take us across the border in Switzerland. That was September 8th. September 8th was when Italy formally surrendered to the Allies, and we made it into Switzerland. There, so until that moment, I was not separated from my family. We were always together.
Mm.
We were lucky. We were always together. In Switzerland, we were separated, and me and my elder sister were put up in a Jewish home, which was cared by the Jewish Federation. My parents and the others were taken to other places, to camps. But
I'm sorry, Dr. Paldiel, is this in Switzerland?
that was in Switzerland, yes. And we
Okay.
stayed there until the end of the war. When the war was over, the Swiss told us that we can go back, we should leave. And we went back to Belgium. We came back to Belgium in October 1945. And we stayed there for over 4 years, and then we came to the United States.
Dr. Paldiel, if I may, just kind of before we move into your experiences in the United States, I know that you were so young during the Holocaust, and so your memories are very little, but I was wondering if you might share with us some more of your memories of the cleric Simon Gallay, your family's rescuer. Maybe it was memories that your parents shared with you. And one more question is, with your siblings, how many siblings did you have? Were they much older than you?
No, I was the second oldest. I had an elder sister, and all the others were younger than me. When we crossed into Switzerland, I was 6 years old. I have to add that while we were in France, I had no idea that I was Jewish. My parents, I come from a very religious family, but my parents, they kept from me any knowledge of any, and of course we couldn't practice the Jewish religion in all these places that we were. I had no idea even what it meant to be Jewish. Before we crossed into Switzerland, I went to first grade school in the village. And there they taught us the Catholic prayer. So I even, before I went to sleep, I used to make my Catholic prayers. And of course, my parents didn't say anything because they didn't want me to think that I was anything else than a young Catholic kid, like everybody else in the village. Once we crossed into Switzerland and I was in that Jewish home and I was 6 years old, then I learned I was Jewish, which was something new to me. I didn't know what it meant. So during the 3 years where we were in France, trying to outwit the French police and then the Germans, I had no idea that I was Jewish. And my thinking was when we were traveling from one place to another, that was the way it was. We just moved from one place to another. It was like a great adventure. So I had no idea. I did not suffer. I was not separated from
the entire time when you all were moving around.
The entire time that we were in Switzerland. But of course, we had to be constantly on the move, and food was not always available. And we got out in time before the police and so on came to us. I have to add that we were on a danger list because my parents, they were carrying Polish passports. My parents had come to Belgium from Poland and they still had Polish passports. So in the eyes of the French authorities, we were foreigners. And when they had to turn over Jews to the Germans, they usually picked the foreigners first before they picked the French Jewish citizens. So we were quite lucky. I would say that what we survived because of determination and luck and the help of a Catholic priest.
Thank you, Dr. Paldiel. Could you maybe share us a little bit more about Mr. Simon Gallay and how your mother, it seems like your mother met him first. How did they even come in contact with each other?
My mother, what she told me, and I'm sorry I didn't question her more thoroughly. She has passed away, but she was told about this man. She didn't know his name because they didn't give out names then. But she was told, go to Evian and go into that church, And when you go to that church, the priest there will help you. So she got a permit from a doctor to go to Evian for health reasons, because people were not allowed to travel in those days. But Evian was known as a place where people, there are mineral waters and so on. So for health reasons, people came there to take baths. So she went into that church and she met that man, and she told him that she was Jewish and she was trying to get across the border into Switzerland. He understood. And I was there with my mother. I don't remember him then. And then he told my mother to bring along the rest of the family. My father and the smaller children were, they didn't accompany my mother to meet the priest because for safety reasons, we didn't know what his response would be. And then my mother realized she could trust him, and we all were together, and he told us what to do, to take a bus to a place, a town closer to the border, and there two men would be waiting for us as we got off the bus, two men that he had signed for us, and he would lead us across the border. I remember that I was 6 years old, and as we were walking at night, that I remember very clearly. At night, it was September night. It was a bright moon. It wasn't too cold. I had a cold overcoat. I was carrying my little kid brother in my arms. And I was asking, why are we walking at night in a wooded area? And of course, I asked this to one of the two guides that were taking us, because I was speaking French. Mm. I still speak French. So I said, why are we walking there? And he said, well, can you keep a secret? I said, yes. I said, we are walking in order to meet Tarzan. So look up on the trees and you'll see him. The Tarzan was very popular then in the comics. There was in the 1930s, a lot of movies were made of Tarzan. So I said, this is very exciting. I mean, I couldn't have asked for something better. I didn't know why I deserved such a bonus of going out to meet Tarzan. And so I walked.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then we came to barbed wire. There was the frontier. And the two men, they had pliers. They cut the barbed wire and I crossed. I remember I cut myself on my hand. And then they told us that they're going to leave us on a little ridge. We were right on the Swiss side. And the Swiss border patrol was going to pass by very soon. But they had to quit because the law in Switzerland was refugees with children would be admitted, but anyone else would be sent back. And so they were afraid if they got caught, they would be sent back to France. So we were sitting on that little ridge and I was saying, you know, when will Tarzan appear? So anyway, suddenly two soldiers came out from behind the bushes and with rifles pointing at us. And they said in French, "Haut les mains," which means hands up. And they repeated that twice. So I remember raising my hands, and my father and mother raised our hands. And I said to myself then, this is even more exciting than what I thought. You know, we're getting arrested by, you know, this is like in the comics. I had no idea that we were crossing into Switzerland because I was Jewish. And if somebody had told me then I was Jewish, I would have said, what's that? You know, all I knew then was there were the French and were the dirty crowds. The dirty crowds, the Germans, they were bad. That's all I knew. So, so finally they took us into a truck and they took us and they allowed us to sleep over that night in a police station. And then they allowed us to stay in Switzerland. That was in September 19th. That I remember very clearly. And they took me to a Jewish home. And for the first time, I had to learn the Jewish prayers. I had to put on a skull cap, a kippah. It was like modern Orthodox. And I didn't feel very comfortable there because every morning I was in a big room with 25 other boys. And every morning I had to make my bed and so on. And I had to obey instructions. So I had a problem with discipline with me in those days as a 6-year-old, 7. So I stayed in that home for about 8 months until the Swiss allowed us to be together in Geneva. And so we stayed in Geneva for the better part of a year until the war was over. What I remember in Switzerland, that people were talking about the BBC, they were listening to the British radio, and the British radio was telling about terrible things that were happening to the Jews, that the concentration camp, gas chambers, mass killings. And I remember that I was listening in, and I remember people were discounting that. They were saying, oh, that's war propaganda. It's like, you know, it's propaganda against the Germans. It's unbelievable what they were saying. That people were taking
Who
on
was saying this? I'm sorry, Dr.
the
Paldiel.
British, the BBC,
Mm.
British radio that everybody was listening to get the news, the real news. But we didn't think it was really true. That was exaggerated. I remember that the talks about this thing is, we'll find out after the end of the war the real story. And this is a lot of it is simply propaganda. We knew that the Germans were bad. We fled from the Germans, but we didn't flee from the Germans because we heard that they were taking us to the gas chambers in France. Nobody heard about this. We heard about concentration camps where people were put to work, hard labor, and you could die from that. But we didn't hear about mass executions, and we didn't hear about gas chambers. And the word Auschwitz didn't mean anything to us, these names. So that I remember as a young kid. I was then 6, 7, 8. When the war ended, I was 8 years old.
And before we get to the end of the war and your return to Belgium with your family, I was curious where the rest of your family was when you were in the Jewish home, and were you by yourself without even any of your siblings?
Okay, so my mother was separated from my father. My father was taken to a men's camp, and they had to do some labor. They had to cut wood and everything, but they were not mistreated. My mother was with women and small children. I had relatives that had fled with us to France, and then they continued to Spain, and from Spain they made their way to Morocco, and they stayed in Morocco, which was then held by the French until the end of the war. We had some relatives that stayed behind in Belgium, and then when we came back to Belgium, they were no longer there. My father had a brother who stayed in Belgium. I later learned when I worked at Yad Vashem that he tried to make it to Switzerland in 1942, but he got caught by the French police, and he was then taken on the train to Auschwitz, and he probably died in Auschwitz. And my parents, of course, had distant relatives in Poland, distant cousins, and so on. They all perished. They all, we don't know how and when and what, they disappeared. What I remember is when we got back to Belgium in October 1945, and we were sitting in a place, and we were talking among ourselves, and we said, where's Mr. So-and-so? And somebody says, well, they took him on a train, and we don't know. We haven't heard from him. And what about Mr. So-and-so? And he stayed behind. What happened to him? And I remember the answers, we don't know. They took him away on a train, and so far he has not returned. So that's why we were sitting there, and we dropped our jaws. We said, wow, all these people, where are they? So that's when we really began to believe the stories about the concentration camps, the Holocaust, as we call it today. Only towards the end of the war, it sank in that something terrible had happened. We had relatives in Belgium that we fled to France, but there were those who said, we're not going anywhere, we're staying here. The Germans will come in very soon. So what? They're anti-Semites. Well, we Jews, we have 2,000 years experience with anti-Semites, so we'll manage somehow, you know. Anti-Semitism has been with us throughout our history. What are we going to do in France? Where are we going to go in the village? We're going to pick potatoes? I mean, no, we're going to stay here and we'll manage. Most of the Jews, most of the Jews in Antwerp were in the diamond and jewelry business.
Actually, we have a question from Len Weber asking, did your family work in the diamond business?
Yes, my father was in the diamond business, and in Antwerp especially. And so the idea of going into France, nowhere, and staying who knows where, didn't seem like a very attractive idea. So there were a lot of people who could have fled, and they stayed behind, and many of them did not survive.
Thank you, Dr. Paldiel. I actually want to ask one more question from our audience, if you don't mind. This question is from Cherie Mayer, who asks, how did you manage to get an apartment and food or job and work for your father in Vichy, France? And so, you know, just more about what was life like in hiding and on the move seeking refuge in France, in Vichy,
Okay,
in Vichy and writ large?
That's a good question. Vichy, France, the Vichy government was anti-Semitic, but not to that extreme as in the occupied zone. They allowed Jewish organizations to function there. Jewish welfare organizations were allowed to function. There were various Jewish organizations. There was Ozay for the children, and there were others, the Jewish Boy Scouts, and they allowed the American-based Jewish Distribution Committee, the Joint, to operate in France and to help out people who needed help. And so my family, my parents were supported by some of these organizations. I wish to point out that the United States had diplomatic relations with Vichy, France up until November 1942. The United States and Vichy, France had diplomatic relations. There was an American ambassador in Vichy, Admiral Leahy. The relations were broken off in November 1942 when the United States landed troops in Morocco and Algeria, which belonged to France. The French objected and they broke off relations. In other words, 2 years into the German occupation of France, the United States had relations with the Vichy government. And so Jewish organizations in the United States were able to send money and to operate and to help out some Jewish people. And some Jewish people in France were able to get American visas and get out in time. Of course, American visas were hard to get, but some people were able to get out, and they came to the American embassy or the American consulate in Marseille. They got a visa stamped on them, and they left in time up until November. All of this changed in November 1942.
Thank you. I actually have another question here from Kim Johnson, who asks, many stayed in Belgium, and you were speaking to this, but what convinced your father to leave and go to France and leave his career?
Well, I don't know what happened. My mother was the dominating person, and she said, I'm not staying here under the Germans. The thinking was, we'll go to France. The French will stop the Germans. The French army was lauded as being very powerful. In World War I, they stopped the Germans from even getting, the Germans never came to Paris in World War I. They were stopped before that. The war continued, but the French army held on. And so the thinking was that we'll be safe in France. The Germans are going to persecute us. They were pronounced anti-Semite. We had heard about the concentration camps already in Germany. So in France, we would be safe. We didn't know that France was going to collapse so fast. Now, after this I have to add, when France was defeated, a lot of Jews went back to Belgium from France. They felt that the war was over. The Germans had won. Let's not forget, America was not at war with, America had not entered the war. It was before Pearl Harbor. Russia was not at war. Russia was allied to Nazi Germany at that time. And so my father wanted to go back, and my mother said, no, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to live in a country under Nazi German domination. So my father said, but what I'm going to do here? I have my business in Belgium. So she said, well, you can go back, but I'm staying here with the kids. And my father then said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so she put her foot down, my mother, and we stayed in France. And
Bless her.
So not that my mother felt that she was going to be killed, but she didn't want to live in a country under Nazi German domination. She had that premonition about this.
And Dr. Paldiel, we have a question back in Switzerland from Scotty Hudson. He asked, what did you do to pass the time as a kid in Switzerland?
What did I pass to do?
What did you do to pass the time as a kid in
I
Switzerland?
was first in that children's home in Bex, B-E-X, in the French zone of Switzerland. We went to school there. They had classes, and they had religious classes and non-religious classes, secular classes. And then when we went to Geneva, I went to public school there, probably second grade. Life was, relatively speaking, easy, comfortable, by contrast to the life that we had in France. We didn't have to flee from one place to another. We had to report to the police from time to time that we were still there. And my parents were supported by various organizations. In fact, my parents were supported by the Polish embassy. The Poles had an embassy in Switzerland, in Bern. And the Swiss then my father came with a Polish passport. He still held on to the Polish passport. He was, although I was born in Belgium, but we were considered Polish citizens.
And your parents were born in Poland.
And my parents were born in Poland, right? In fact, the fact that my parents were born in Poland, but I was born in Belgium, I had a conversation with a Polish ambassador who said, if you want to become a Polish citizen, I can arrange it for you because your parents, I said, no, thank you. I'm quite happy with the citizen. I'm an Israeli citizen, an American citizen, and that's good enough for me. But if I wanted to become a Polish citizen, I could do it very fast. But anyway, so since my parents were Polish citizens, the friends who kept us in the various homes and my parents in the camp, so somebody had to pay for food and board and so on. So they turned to the Polish embassy in Bern and they said, we have a Polish family that has come here, and this is how much it is per diem, per day, and they paid. I learned this afterwards. When I worked at Yad Vashem, I got the documents from the Polish embassy about my family.
Thank you, Dr. Paldiel. And I know we only have about 25 minutes left, so and we want to speak about your time as director of Yad Vashem's Righteous Among the Nations. So actually, the next question I really want to ask you is how you got to the United States. So you did immediately at the end of the war, you and your family returned to your hometown in Belgium. Did you decide to leave Europe upon your return to Belgium immediately, and then this took a few years, or what was that process like?
Well, when we returned to Belgium towards the end of '45, my father went back to returned to the diamond business, and then people began to worry there because the Cold War had started, and there was a fear that there was going to be another war between the United States and Soviet Union. And everybody was saying, wow, we just made it through a war. We're going to have to make it through another war. Maybe the Russians will come in. And so a lot of people were thinking about leaving. And that is when my parents, my mother had a sister already living in the United States. And she made out an affidavit, a statement. And so we decided we were going to go to the United States to avoid what everybody thought was going to be not a Cold War, but a hot war. So we arrived in the United States on January 1950. I want to say something about Father Simon Gallay, the Catholic priest.
Please.
When I worked at Yad Vashem, I was wondering about this Catholic priest who arranged our escape. Where is he? Is he still alive or what? And I worked in the department of the righteous among the nations, in other words, people who saved Jews. And so I asked my mother and my father, give me as much details as you know about this man. So my mother gave me the principal details. And I said, I wonder where he is. So one day, a Franciscan monk on a visit to Israel dropped by at Yad Vashem, and he came to see me about a tree, he was inspecting a tree that somebody had planted. And I said to him, I'm going to ask you a favor. And I told him my story, and I said, you're going back to France. Where are you going? And he said, I'm going in that region of Evian-les-Bains, and that's the region where that priest lived. I told him the story. He said, can you please find out maybe that person is still alive? At least I want to say thank you to him. And I gave him the details, and I remember he was sitting in, in his brown robe of a monk. We shook hands, and he said, I'll do my best. And as he left the office, I said, I probably will never hear from him because, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And after a few months, I get a letter from Simon Gallay. He says, I am the man who helped you. I fell off my chair. And then he gave me details. And then I got more stories out of him. When my mother saw him and before she took leave of him, she wanted to give him her wedding ring. She wanted to take it off from her hand. And then he said, no, I'm not going to take your wedding ring. I don't want to take any gifts from you, and so on. I got a lot of details. And I had him honored as a righteous Gentile by Yad Vashem. And then in 1990, I flew to, he was already in a retirement home, in a Catholic retirement home in the city of Annecy. Annecy is in that region. I took a plane, I flew to Geneva, across to Annecy, and we had a big ceremony where he was given a medal and a certificate of honor. The Israeli ambassador was there, the local bishop was there, and we honored him. And of course, I took pictures of him. And then I came back to Yad Vashem, I planted a tree for him, and it's still there, the tree at Yad Vashem. So I was glad to have met the man. He has since passed away. And I remember I corresponded with him. He asked me all kinds of questions, about the Catholic religion, and he asked me my opinion. And I said, I'm not a theologian of the Catholic religion. I cannot give you my. So anyway, we had an interchange of letters so finally I met the man, and I found out what his real name was, Simon Gallay, and we honored him, and he's on the list of the righteous. And his name appears also on the wall in Paris, in the Holocaust Museum. They have a wall where all the righteous from France that have been honored by Yad Vashem appear. So I did my duty of saying thank you and being gracious and being appreciative for the person that's made it possible for us to be saved.
And on his side, he felt like he did his duty. Didn't want any thanks in many ways.
No, he didn't want anything. He simply felt that he was doing. He told me about some other people that he had helped, and he told me about some other clerics, not only him. And indeed, we honored some additional clerics. We got the evidence and the stories. So he told me about some people, some clerics, a man by the name of Rosé, that got caught and was sent to a concentration camp, and he died. He was a priest. They were helping people, not only Jews, but anyone who had reason to flee from the Germans into Switzerland. One of them had a canoe, and he would take people in his canoe across the lake that separates Switzerland from France, and the lake there called Lac Léman. So he helped us. We were one of these people that needed to be helped. And when we came to him, he said yes, and he did it. So that's the story of that man, Simon Gallay.
And one more question about Simon Gallay. Thank you so much, Dr. Paldiel. Was this one of the first medals that you ever awarded to a rescuer as former director of Righteous Among the Nations at Yad Vashem?
Oh, no, I awarded many medals before that.
Oh,
That was my job, to do research. And when people came to Yad Vashem to have a ceremony and to give medals from whatever country, it could be France, could be Belgium, could be Poland, Hungary. We even honored Germans, anyone who helped Jews in various ways to survive by either hiding them or taking them to safe places or hiding the children. So he was not the first one, no.
and what messages and points do you want people to really make sure that they remember today in relation to your role as director of Righteous Among the Nations and your incredible amounts of scholarship that you've written about the rescue of Jews during the Holocaust? What do you really want people to know and take away from today in regards to this?
Well, I worked for 24 years as head of that department. And I came away with the feeling that there was a lot of goodness in people's behavior. It is there. There is the possibility of doing a good deed is there. I mean, those people who helped, it's not people who had made a decision that they wanted to help. They wanted to dedicate their lives to help. These are not people like, for instance, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa made a decision, I want to help the others. And then she decided she wants to go to India, but that's where help was needed. These people that we honored as righteous among the nations, they didn't make such a decision. They were minding their own business, going about their life. And suddenly, they were confronted face to face with somebody who needed to be helped. And they had to decide on the spot, well, am I going to help that person or not? And for some strange reason, which they cannot explain to this day, they decided they were going to do it. They were going to help that person. Not because they were cut out altruists, but they decided as human beings, that person has a right to live and I'm going to help it. So that man, Simon Gallay, I mean, my mother stood before him and he realized that at that moment he was assuming the role of God. He could say yes, or he could say no. He could say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And then what could we do? The Germans were coming into that part of France, and they would probably pick us up and take us on a train to Auschwitz. He knew that. He knew either it's yes or no. I am now in the role of God, and I'm going to say yes. So this is him, and it's not only him. So there's a potential of goodness of people who are not cut out to be altruists throughout their lives. I have met people from we have honored from all walks of life, not necessarily people that you would qualify as being exceedingly good people. We honored a German by the name of Oskar Schindler. The man didn't care about anyone else. He cared only about himself. He was a hedonist. All he thought about was how many girlfriends he could have at one and the same time. And what a good life, and then he came upon the scene in Poland and he realized that he could save all these people that were working for him and making it possible for him to be a playboy. And he decided he was going to invest all his money. He was going to save them because these people had a right to live. And he knew how to do it because he knew how to finagle all these Nazis with whom he confronted, with whom he had parties. And he stayed and he saved them. And after the war, when he was asked, why did you do it? He also had difficulty explaining his motivation. But here's one person, a member of the Nazi party, who saved more Jews single-handedly than any other person. He saved over 1,200 Jews. So I came away with the feeling, with the belief that it's not true that the human condition is like what social Darwinists have told us, that everybody is out there for himself and people compete and nobody gives a damn about the other guy. That people are by nature aggressive. And when they do a good deed, they want everybody to know about it so they can be hailed and praised. Because these people that saved Jews, they didn't do it because they knew that one day they're going to get a medal from Yad Vashem, which did not yet exist. In fact, they had to keep it a secret. So they couldn't even be thanked, hailed by their own societies, by their own communities. They were breaking the law. And yet they did it because they felt it had to be done. So I think these people, these are people we can associate. We can look into their eyes and say, if they could do it, maybe I can do a good deed myself. I'm capable of doing it, although I am busy with other things. I am busy making money and buying stocks on Wall Street and so on. But I can do a good deed. If there is a need to help out somebody, then do it. Like these people who did it and they risked their life. If they would be caught, they could be killed. So you can do a good deed without having to risk your life. So there's a message out there about these people that we honor as righteous among the nations.
Thank you so much. I'm going to want to replay exactly what you just said many times. And so thank goodness this is recorded. And I think this really leads us into a question on how we act today. So as you know, today is a few days after the commemoration of Kristallnacht. So Dr. Paldiel, as we near the end of our time together today, and with Kristallnacht in mind and your scholarship in mind, may you share with us your thoughts and the lessons for today. How do we respond to anti-Semitism and human rights violations today?
Well, today we are faced with a similar problem like the Jewish people was faced during the Nazi period. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are fleeing from their countries because they're afraid or for whatever reasons. We have a huge refugee problem. And the world has not learned the lessons about that these refugees are human beings. In 1938, the United States invited 32 countries to a conference in Evian, the Evian conference, to see what they could do with Jewish refugees from Germany. And they all came together and they said, we can't do anything. We're not going to change our immigration laws. Sorry. So it ended in failure. And the Nazis took it as a signal that they could go on and do whatever they wanted to do and even radicalize, because the world didn't care about the Jews. So the world hasn't learned the lessons. We still don't care about these refugees. I am not saying all of them have to be admitted in the United States. They're illegal refugees, but cannot the United Nations gather all these countries, especially the Latin American countries? We're talking about the refugees who come from Latin American countries. And each of them to make a commitment to take in those refugees that are fleeing from, I don't know where, Venezuela and someplace. In Venezuela, people are starving. What's the United Nations? Why was it created? Was it created simply for people to come there and make beautiful speeches? It was created to resolve a problem like the problem of the refugees. The same thing for the Arab refugees that are fleeing from Syria. Where are all these brother countries, the other Arab, Muslim countries? Can't they do something and admit some of these refugees? They go on boats, they try to go to Europe because that's the only place that they think they can be safe. What about going to Morocco, to Algeria? What about going to Dubai, to Oman, to some other countries with UN support and treat them decently as human beings? Why is the United Nations so paralyzed when it comes to refugees? Haven't we learned anything from World War II to what happened to the Jews? So I remember I was in Israel and when Menachem Begin became prime minister, I believe it was in 19 68, 67, I'm sorry. One of the first things he did, he ordered that one of these refugee boats, where there were a lot of Vietnamese who were fleeing the communists in Vietnam, and they were on the sea, I will take one boat, a full load of boats into Israel. So suddenly arrived in Israel several thousand people from Vietnam that were picked up on a boat. They came to Israel. They were taken care of by the government, and they settled. They're still there. And thanks to that, when you go to Israel today, you can go to eat Vietnamese food in one of the Vietnamese restaurants. So in other words, you got to do something and not just say there's nothing we can do. And I'm very disappointed that when we see all these refugees that are fleeing from there, especially from Syria, because Syria is a country in total chaos, and they go in all directions. They are kept in camps, and some of them try to cross the sea in boats, and some of them drown. And the United Nations does nothing about this. I mean, it's terrible. So we haven't learned yet the lessons of Kristallnacht and the Holocaust. You said Kristallnacht. When Kristallnacht, the British at least made a gesture, and they allowed up to 10,000 children to enter Britain. And these children, their parents at least gave up the rights on these children. They wanted at least these children to be safe. And these children survived. The parents did not. So at least the British made a gesture with 10,000 children. And I just want to remind everyone, at the same time, the United States, there was a bill by Wagner Rogers bill to admit 10,000, 20,000 children supported by Jewish organizations, and it was not accepted by the Congress. So there are lessons to be learned, and we still haven't learned these lessons. We still haven't learned these lessons, I must say.
Thank you, Dr. Paldiel. I think we have time for one more question. You are now a professor in New York, and still thinking about what we do today. What do you tell your students today? What are some messagings and points that you want to tell us that you really tell your students in regards to Holocaust education and how we take action today?
I tell my students always to be vigilant. A terrible tragedy starts with acts that people excuse. When the Nazis came to power, they started by passing legislation against the Jews. One of the first laws was the law for the reconstruction of the civil service, which they said a Jew cannot work for the government. That was in April 1933. And then the same month, they passed another law, which said the law against the overcrowding of schools, which they said Jewish students in public schools can only be up to 2% of the student population, whereas Jewish students usually in the gymnasium and high school were up to 20%, 25%. Now you can't go to public school anymore because you're Jewish. This is 1933. The world kept silent and overlooked that. It's an interior, it's something interior. It's an interior thing of a German domestic thing. We don't get involved. 2 years later came the Nuremberg laws, which stated Jews and non-Jews can no longer marry. Jews and non-Jews cannot have sexual relations, punishable by law. A Jew cannot keep in his house a German non-Jewish woman under the age of 45 because the Jews will try to seduce her. It was passed by law, and the world kept silent. I mean, when you have, and so it goes by step, by step, by step, by step, and finally it goes to the gas chambers. You have to stop it at the beginning. When something goes wrong at the beginning, you stop it then. You don't wait until it gets out of hand, and then you go to war, and then millions of soldiers have to die. You stop evil at the beginning. So when you see today a regime or any intentions of people to do something, to hurt another group for strictly racial reasons, you got to stop it right there. Even in this country, in the United States, because anything can get out of hand. Even in the United States today, there's a lot of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of white supremacists that are targeting Jews, Muslims, Latinos. They got to be stopped now, and not allow them to have a voice over internet and over the tweets and so forth, and Facebook. You got to stop them from propagating their views before it gets very, very dangerous. That is the lesson that I hope we can learn from what happened during the Holocaust.
Dr. Paldiel, on that note, what an honor to have you with us today here, speaking for our community here in Central Florida, and really with friends across the globe too, here virtually. It's been a blessing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody who listened in.
Really such a privilege and special opportunity to listen and to learn from you from the bottom of our hearts. We are so thankful to you. I'm seeing so many notes of appreciation come through right now through the chat. Thank you very much for the lecture and sharing your story. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your story. It's been an honor to listen. And thank you so much to our audience always for being with us and for writing such meaningful questions and dialogues into the chat. I look forward to continuing our courageous conversations in all of our future community events. And so now I'll just spend, a minute concluding our event today with a few important reminders or new announcements, especially for those joining us for the first time or those just learning about us. After today, you will receive an email with a link to take a short survey where you can provide your feedback. And if you'll just take a few moments, we greatly appreciate your time and telling us how we can improve our time together in future events. The recording of today's event will be uploaded to our website by tomorrow. So please share with any family, friends, colleagues who missed this discussion to watch at their leisure or for you to watch again at yours. There are also links being posted into the chat where you can donate to the Holocaust Center and support our mission. Thank you all so much for your financial support to keep these special programs and conversations going. Our next virtual program is part of our In My Own Words series on December 9th, where we have a live virtual conversation with Dr. Edith Eager, a Holocaust survivor. Links posted into the chat as well, and we hope to see you all there. And on behalf of the Holocaust Center, thank you all so much for being with us today. I hope you all stay safe. Hope to see you soon at virtual events or even in person at our museum now that we've reopened on a limited basis. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your day. And Dr. Paldiel, thank you so much again. It's been an honor. I'm going to end the Zoom meeting now, but I'll email you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye, Dr. Paldiel. I'll email you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So it went pretty well, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely beautifully. I need to listen again and again because listening to you and learning from you is, I would like to every day. Let's put it that way.
Well,
and then
you're a good moderator. You moderated it very well. So continue, go on and continue on your job. You're doing it very well.
Oh, thank you. That means, you have no idea. That means the world to me.
Yes.
It means the absolute world to me.
And
if you don't mind, I'm going to email with you
yes.
just to let you know about some of the work we're doing here and an upcoming exhibit that I think
Absolutely.
you'll really be interested in.
Okay, so I'm going to leave, right? And I'll hear from you on the email.
Perfect.
Okay.
I hope you have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.